Hello, welcome to another episode of Field of Screams. This is your host, Tyler Singleton, and this is the episode for Night of the Living Dead. Now, before I get started, I want to talk about the first 3 episodes of this podcast. Originally, when I recorded them, I was going to drop them about a week apart, spread them out, but then I got thinking, I said, why don't I just drop them all on one day and just see how it goes, see if I get any feedback and see if I get any listeners. I ended up getting a lot of feedback actually. 7 subscribers on YouTube, a lot of people reaching out saying they liked the material. Some people had some suggestions, some movies they liked. There were a couple listeners from Canada, and there's even one listener from the Czech Republic. So that was pretty exciting to see. Those that listened to the first 3 episodes and reached out and gave feedback and told me what you thought, thank you very much. That's greatly appreciated. And if you're brand new to this podcast, go ahead and reach out and tell me what you think. I'm always willing to hear feedback. As far as releasing future episodes, the original plan was to release bi-weekly, but as you can see, this one's a little soon. If I'm on my feet and I have these episodes made, I'll release them earlier. Maybe I'll go weekly. But at the very least, I plan to release an episode bi-weekly. Now let's go ahead and get started on talking about Night of the Living Dead. Let's start by talking about a man named George A. Romero. George Romero and his 2 friends, John Russo and Russell Strainer, had some experience in filmmaking by filming commercials. Wanting to get away from the commercial game, George Romero and John Russo sat down and started writing a script for a movie. The first draft they made was a horror comedy about adolescent aliens who visit Earth and befriend human teenagers. The teenagers and aliens would generally cause mischief with the help of their cosmic pet called the Mess. The first draft being quite different from the movie that we know, the budget restraints made this draft impossible, so they had to make a second draft. Russo penned the second draft. This draft was about a young man who runs away from home and discovers rotting human corpse that aliens use for food scattered across a meadow under glass. The rotting human corpse would turn alien-like underneath this glass, and then they would consume humans. Romero read this draft, and he really liked the idea of human corpse eating people, calling them flesh eaters. That would be the big selling point. It's different, it's grotesque. The only problem was making human bodies overly decomposed or really rotted away cost a lot of money with a lot of makeup, and they didn't have the budget for that. They made a final draft focusing on reanimated corpse but recently deceased animated corpse. Romero states that this draft drew a lot of inspiration from the novel I Am Legend. This draft was used to create the movie that we all know today. Many people state this movie is basically the launching pad of modern day zombie films. The thing is, though, they never use the word zombie one time in this film. In an interview, Romero states that though he did draw some inspiration from the Haitian folklore of zombies, that he felt that his zombies or ghouls were different enough to be a completely different thing. While making this film, Romero often referred to the dead as ghouls, but his favorite term to use was flesh eaters. The original title of this movie was actually going to be Night of the Flesh Eaters, but when he went to different distributors to see who would take the movie, distributors turned Romero away because of how gory the movie was. Another big turnoff was the film had a rather bleak ending, and distributors were turned off by that. They were like, no, we want a happy ending, but Romero refused to give in. Romero finally came across a distributor who would accept the film unedited. The only request that they made was they wanted Romero to change the title of the film. Another film had came out around that year that had a very similar title that had something to do with flesh eaters. So the distributor said, how about we change the title from Night of the Flesh Eaters to Night of the Living Dead? Romero agreed to do this, and he changed the name from Night of the Flesh Eaters to Night of the Living Dead. There was one problem though. While changing the name of the film, the copyright notice was accidentally deleted from the early releases of the film. So with the copyright deleted, you might notice there's a lot of cheesy remakes in Night of the Living Dead. A lot of knockoffs, a lot of trying to get money just off the title. This is the reason why. You might notice in other scary movies that if characters are doing something in a living room and the TV's on and they are playing some type of movie, a lot of times it's Night of the Living Dead. And this is another reason why, because it's public domain. They don't have to go through the copyright to put it in their film, so it's quite a common choice. So now that we've talked about some of the background stuff that happened with this film, the copyright issues and how they made the draft of the film, let's talk about the actual film itself and let's break it down. Spoiler alert to those who have not seen Night of the Living Dead, even though it is long overdue. Night of the Living Dead was co-written by John Russo and George Romero. The movie was directed, photographed, and edited by Romero, and it was produced by Russell Strainer and Carl Hardman. Romero and Russo have cameos in this film. Russo plays a zombie that reaches through a window during one scene. Romero is in a television broadcast scene. The producers, Russell Strainer and Carl Hardman, play characters in this film as well, but we'll get to them in a little bit. Film starts off with a car driving to a cemetery. In this car are two characters, Johnny and Barbara. Remember the producer that I mentioned 8 seconds ago, Russell Strainer? Yeah, he plays Johnny. I told you we'd get to him. The actress Judith O'Drea plays Barbara. Judith has stated in an interview that at the time she had no clue that the film would blow up like it did. Even though this film was a good experience for her, Judith says she usually stays away from horror films because they terrify her too much. The one film she stated that she thinks that's the scariest is The House of Wax. Now let's go back to them in the car driving to the cemetery. Johnny and Barbara are driving to the cemetery to put a wreath on their father's grave. It's been said before that in this film that there is a lot of ad-libbing going on, and you can tell sometimes by the dialogue. As they pull up, Barbara makes the comment, "Man, I wish we would just get rid of daylight saving time," to whereas Johnny goes, "Well, why is that?" And Barbara replies, "Well, it's 8 o'clock and it's still daylight out." That left me scratching my head a bit because they pull up to visit their father's grave and she's kind of wishing it would be dark out. It doesn't really make sense, but I'm guessing they're just trying to come up with dialogue on the spot. Johnny then makes a comment about how they spend a 6-hour drive just to spend 15 minutes to put a wreath on the grave, and then they would have a 6-hour drive back. Johnny then complains about it being so late, to which Barbara replies, "Well, if you didn't sleep in so much, we would have got here sooner." Now, I'm no mathematician, but if it's 8 o'clock and it's a 6-hour drive, that means they left by 2 o'clock. How late did Johnny sleep in? I mean, come on, Johnny. 2 o'clock? Seriously? Johnny and Barbara start walking around the graveyard looking for their father's grave, and then they notice some man wandering around in the graveyard. Johnny starts some classic brother hijinks by saying, "He's coming to get you, Barbara," to which she's laughing and telling him to stop and that he might hear. Johnny runs off a little bit, and then the man wandering around, Barbara approaches him to apologize, and this man attacks Barbara. He is a ghoul, or flesh eater. Johnny notices that the man was indeed coming to get Barbara, and he runs over to help, and he starts to wrestle around with this ghoul. Johnny actually holds his own for the first couple of seconds. He throws the ghoul down. It looks like he might win the fight, but then they both go to the ground, and the ghoul does basically the softest hit ever, and I guess he kills Johnny. When I say the softest hit ever, it looks like Johnny's head doesn't even hit anything. I don't even know what really happens. Johnny just kind of goes, "Ugh," and then he lays there motionless. Now that Johnny's been eliminated, the ghoul decides to go after Barbara. Barbara takes off running. She gets into her car. The ghoul catches up to her car, but Barbara gets it started and she takes off driving. Now at this point, Barbara is aggressively driving probably 10 miles per hour. Despite her driving 10 miles per hour, she's still creating some distance between her and the ghoul. All she had to do at this point was just keep her car on the road. She's not going 50, 60. She is going 10 miles per hour. This car is crawling on the road. What does Barbara do? Somehow she loses control and hits a tree. Barbara then has to exit the car, and then it's a foot race again. The ghoul pursues her until she gets to a house, and she goes inside the house and she hides for a bit. Barbara walks through the house, finds a knife. Looking around, she goes upstairs and finds a mess of a corpse. The camera does like this quick zoom in on it. It's like, da-da! It's like a skeleton looking thing. Barbara runs away from that, and she looks outside. She sees headlights. She goes outside, and this is where we meet our character, Ben. Ben then makes Barbara go back inside, and they kind of talk a bit. And when I say talk, I mean Ben asks a bunch of questions, and Barbara just kind of stares off into space. Ben is cast by the actor Duane Jones. Duane Jones is an African-American actor, and around this time, having an African-American actor lead a film might be controversial to some people. When asked if it was a political move to have Dwayne Jones as the lead actor, Romero said no, there was no political motivation. He just cast Dwayne because he did the best in the audition process. The character Ben was originally supposed to be a lower class uneducated truck driver, but Romero said that Dwayne Jones was a very educated man and refused to do the role as it was written. Romero sat down with Jones and they talked about ways how they could improve some of his dialogue and the direction of the character, and what you see on the screen is how Dwayne felt the character should be represented. Ben looks around the house and he finds a crowbar. He then asks Barbara if there's more than 2 of the ghouls outside. Barbara again doesn't really say much or help. Ben goes upstairs to where he spots the nasty looking corpse, to which he just goes, "Jesus Christ," and then walks away. Ben goes outside, takes the crowbar, and he eliminates 2 of the ghouls. He then notices that another ghoul snuck inside the house and almost gets Barbara, but Ben runs in and eliminates that ghoul also. More ghouls arrive, and Ben pushes them back so they don't get inside the house, and then he closes the door. At this point, it starts the process to where Ben starts nailing down wooden boards and planks to windows and doors to try to make sure no ghouls can get inside the house. Once Ben starts feeling satisfied with boarding up the house, him and Barbara sit down and they kind of ad-lib some lines to kind of describe what's going on. Ben talks about how he knows that the ghouls are afraid of fire, and fire is something they could use to protect themselves. Barbara then tells Ben about how the ghoul got Johnny, and then she kind of goes into hysterics, and then she starts saying, "We gotta go get Johnny, we gotta go outside," to which Ben goes, "No, stop." Barbara then slaps Ben, and Ben slaps her back. This knocks Barbara out, or makes her pass out, to which Ben then lays her down on the couch until she finally wakes up again. When she wakes up, Ben decides to go upstairs to kind of clear out some of the rooms and get rid of that nasty looking corpse. While this is going on, the radio is playing, and it's kind of breaking down the scenario of what's going on in the outside world. If you are listening to the radio, you can kind of see or imagine what's going on outside of the house. It's talking about mass homicide, people looking normal, but they seem like they're under a trance. The president is meeting with the cabinet, the FBI will be in this meeting, high-ranking scientists, and then it drops. NASA will also be there, which, if you're watching this movie for the first time, you're probably wondering, what's NASA doing there? The radio then says that the people are acting like animals, some look torn apart as they're walking around. It's really just kind of letting your imagination play. While the radio is playing, 2 guys burst in from the cellar. These 2 guys are Harry Cooper and Tom. Harry Cooper is Carl Hardman, one of the film's producers. He also is the voice in the radio in Johnny's car at the very beginning of the movie. Tom was played by Keith Wayne. Keith Wayne was his stage name. His actual name was Ronald Keith Hartman. He left acting and worked as a singer in the 1970s. Night of the Living Dead was the only film he did. In the 1980s, he became a chiropractor, and he wrote a column called The Chiropractor's Corner in Hard Gainer magazine. As soon as Harry Cooper and Ben meet each other, they begin by arguing. Ben accuses them of hiding in the cellar while they were in trouble earlier. Harry Cooper says, "Well, we didn't know who was up here." Ben replies, "Well, there's a girl screaming. You weren't going to help the girl." And Harry goes, "Well, I didn't know. Maybe she was done. I didn't know what was going on up here. There could have been 100 ghouls." After that argument, Cooper then says, "Well, we all need to go down in the cellar. It's the safest place to go." Ben then replies, "No, we're staying upstairs, and the cellar's a death trap." Cooper replies, "Well, if we go in the cellar, there's only one way they can get in. It's heavily fortified. There's no way they'll get in." Ben replies, "Well, if they do get in, it's a death trap. There's no way out. I'm not going down there." And they argue about that for a while, to whereas everyone else just kind of looks along. Tom is kind of doing the guys, "Come on, let's quit arguing," and they're trying to find a solution. They decide to roll with Ben's plan, staying upstairs. Cooper has a daughter who's sick downstairs in the cellar, and his wife was watching over the daughter. Some ghouls end up breaking through one of the windows, to which Ben and Tom, they fight them off with a knife, and then Ben uses a gun to shoot a couple in the head to eliminate them. but the gunfire of the shot draws more ghouls to the area. There's a moment to where you feel for Cooper. He walks up to Ben and says, "Hey, if we're all upstairs, I have a kid who's not doing so well. She's struggling. Can we do this for the kid?" And then Ben replies, "Yeah, it must be tough to have a father that's so stupid that wants to sit in a death trap." Cooper isn't meant to be a character that is liked. There's even a moment he goes down to talk to his wife Helen, and when he tells her about the argument they have, Helen just goes, "Oh, well, you had to be right, didn't you?" She's even a little tired of Cooper. Even with him being a unlikable character, though, this was a pretty low blow for Ben. At this point in the movie, we have a bunch of characters. We have Barbara, we have Ben, we have Harry Cooper, we have Helen, who is Harry Cooper's wife. Helen is played by Marilyn Eastman, and she also plays a ghoul that eats an insect during a scene. We have Karen, who is Harry and Helen's daughter, who is sick in the cellar. The actress that plays Karen, she's actually the daughter of the actor who plays Harry Cooper. So, father and daughter on film, father and daughter in real life. Then we have Tom, and then we have Tom's girlfriend, Judy. Ben ends up finding a television, which he sets up, which convinces the people down in the cellar that they need to come up, with the exception of Helen, I believe at the time. Judy takes over for Helen for a little bit so Helen could go interact with the other cast, but then Helen returns again to watch over her daughter, and Judy goes back upstairs to be with Tom. Cooper walks upstairs and immediately starts complaining, "Oh, these windows look weak, you can't even see through them, that's the problem." Cooper joins the rest of them as they sit around and watch the television broadcast. The broadcast gives us a lot of background information again, just like the radio. They talk about how there was a satellite, it carried a large amounts of radiation, and they're starting to believe that that radiation is the reason why the dead are coming back to life. The scene kind of gives you to where there's government officials walking, and then a scientist says, "Oh, there's definitely a connection to the radiation," to whereas the military guy then says, "Oh, we don't have any proof of that. I thought we wouldn't say that out loud to the public." And you can see there's conflict amongst the group, to whereas the scientists believe the radiation is the cause, and the military guy is just kind of trying to downplay it. Another plot point is in the broadcast they talk about rescue stations, and one of the rescue stations is an area that's not too far away from where they are. I mean, it's drivable, you can't walk it, but they have to drive to get there. So the group immediately starts to devise a plan to which they could get to the gas pumps, that way they can get the truck back to the house, and then they can drive to the rescue camp. As they are creating the plan, the television broadcast then cuts to the news anchor, which he is instructing everyone, once a loved one passes away, they will turn in a minute, so he instructs them to drag them to the road and then burn their corpse, that way they don't come back as a ghoul. Again, it was Romero just using the TV and radio to let your imagination do all the work of imagining these horrible things going on. Now, the plan to get to the gas pump was basically just Ben and Tom going out to the truck after Harry distracts the ghouls, and once they get to the truck, they would take the key, they would drive out there shouldn't be any ghouls out there, they would unlock it, they would get gas in the truck, and then they would find a way to get everyone else in the truck. So the plan starts with Harry distracting the ghouls as planned, Tom gets to the truck as planned, Ben has his gun, and he's trying to ward off the ghouls that are going towards him. Unfortunately, Judy decides to make the decision that she wants to go too, and then she runs outside. Except when she runs outside, she doesn't run directly to the truck, she runs about halfway, pauses, looks back, she kind of stammers towards the house again, and then Ben just goes, "Well, if you're coming, come on," and then Judy joins them. Slows down the whole thing, but they still make it, and they still get in the truck, and they take off towards the gas pump. Now, the events at the gas pump rival the stupidity of Barbara wrecking her car into a tree going 10 miles per hour. They arrive at the pump, Tom jumps out, Ben jumps out of the truck too, with his gun, being kind of the watchman. The ghouls are slowly coming their way. Tom takes the key to the lock, and then Tom goes, "Well, this key ain't working." Ben then looks at him, tells Tom to get out of the way, takes his gun, and shoots the lock that is on the gas pump. He shoots the lock that is on the gas pump. Fortunately, Ben doesn't blow everyone up by shooting the lock on the gas pump, and Tom takes the gas nozzle and goes to put gas in the car. While he's doing this, Ben also has a torch in his hand, by the way. Tom sprays half of the truck with gas, and then the spray hits the torch, which gets half the ground on fire. The truck's on fire. Tom then panics. He hops back into the truck and drives off with Judy, leaving Ben high and dry. And then while they're driving, Tom realizes half the truck is on fire, about to explode. He stops the truck and says, "We gotta get out of here." Tom jumps out of the truck. Judy tries, but it appears she's caught in something. Now, what comes next? It looks like the line's extremely dubbed over. The actress who plays Judy, she looks very frightened, as if she's screaming it, but the actual voice that comes out just sounds like, "My jacket's caught." Tom rushes over to help Judy, but then the truck blows up, killing them both. Ben, even though he was left high and dry, he uses his gun and his torch to fight his way back to the house. When he gets to the house, Cooper locked the front door, which he was supposed to. Ben starts banging on the door, screaming, "Let me in! Cooper, let me in!" Cooper does not let him in, so Ben then kicks the door open, to which, once the door's open, Ben and Cooper fight off some ghouls. They get the wooden boards, they nail the door shut again so that it is secured shut. Once the door is secured shut, Ben then punches Cooper about 5 times, since he didn't let him inside the house. Now everyone in the house is pretty down in the dumps. The ghouls outside, they're eating fried Tom and Judy. Just some really close-up scenes of the ghouls eating meat with chocolate syrup on it. Looks really gross in black and white. After a while, Cooper and Ben start talking again. Ben asks Cooper what's wrong with his daughter down in the cellar. Cooper then says that his daughter was bit by one of the ghouls. Ben gets kind of mad and says, "Oh, you don't know what diseases or infections those things have." And Ben was right. But it leads to another argument. After their argument, we get one last television broadcast to which they announce that the dead coming back to life was a result to the satellite's radiation. They then explain that the radiation reactivates the brain, so you have to kill the brain to kill the ghoul. The news then shows that a defense party is organized as kind of a ragtag group of just neighbors or organized people with guns, are going around towns and cities shooting zombies in the head, trying to clean up the area. The leader of this group is talking about how you have to shoot them in the head, and that they're slow, and that if you know how to take care of them, they should be fairly easy. To which the reporter responds, "Do you think you guys will have the problem wrapped up in 24 hours? It's just like, "Oh, sorry, we have a full-blown apocalypse going on here. We'll let you know if we can wrap it up in 24 hours. As this broadcast is ending, Cooper starts whispering to his wife, "Helen, I want Ben's gun. I'm going to try to take Ben's gun," as if they don't have enough problems. Barbara's within earshot of this, but I mean, she's been traumatized the whole movie and hasn't really said a whole much, and she doesn't hear either. Zombies then start to push in on the house. Ben runs in. He starts to try to hold the windows closed. He drops the gun. Cooper runs over, grabs the gun, says, "Oh, it's my gun now." Ben runs over, takes the gun back, and then shoots Cooper. Cooper stumbles downstairs into his cellar right in front of his daughter, and then it cuts back to the rest of the group upstairs trying to fight off the zombies. There's hundreds of arms reaching through the windows at this point by ghouls. One of them has Helen, and Helen is about to be eaten, but Barbara runs over and helps free Helen. Freeing Helen up comes at a price though, because now they have a hold of Barbara and Barbara can't get free. Helen goes downstairs and she sees that Karen, her daughter, is now up and she is eating her dad. The bits of food that Karen actually was eating was some of the film crew's leftover lunch. They were eating cheeseburgers that day, and they dumped a bunch of chocolate syrup on it. They told her to take a bite. Helen stumbles backwards and falls onto her back. Her daughter that just turned into a ghoul then takes a garden shovel and starts to stab her repeatedly until she is dead. Back upstairs, we got Barbara still being grabbed by zombies. Ben runs over to help, but he is too late as the zombies kind of come through the window. And who other than Johnny himself comes into the house, grabs Barbara, and takes her into the horde of zombies where she is eaten. Ben, who's now alone, decides to make a break for the cellar for safety. Karen sneaks up behind him, but Ben literally just tosses her like a Raggedy Ann doll. Ben goes down into the cellar. He closes the door behind him, secures it. He takes his gun. He takes out Cooper, who comes back to life. Then he looks to Helen. As soon as her eyes open, he takes her out. So now that Ben secured the cellar, he sits down there while the zombies pound on the door, but they can't get in, and it's just a waiting game. What looks to be the next morning, we see the ragtag group from the news approaching the house. Every time that ragtag group comes across a ghoul, they take it out in a matter of seconds, very easily. Ben wakes up when he hears the gunfire from the group and decides to go upstairs and open up the cellar door. We see the leader of the group talking to his other fellow members. They then see in the window Ben creeping around the house. They mistake him for a ghoul. The leader tells his men, "Go ahead, get him right between the eyes," and they shoot Ben in the head. The movie ends with the leader going, "Well, another one for the fire." As the credits roll, we get some still images of the defense party. They use these hooks to pick up the zombie bodies and toss them into the fire. And we get some still images of them picking up Ben's body, tossing him into the fire. It just looks very gross in a way. I guess I would say grainy. And those stills continue until the very end of the credits, and then we see the fire be lit. Now, pretty tragic ending there. Obviously all the main characters meet their demise, but Ben makes it all the way through, and then he gets mistaken for a ghoul and shot in the head. Now, Martin Luther King's assassination happened around the time that this film came out. Many people think that this ending was reflective of the times and it was Romero trying to send a political statement. Romero denies it. He denied it in an interview in 2013. He actually said that he heard about Martin Luther King's assassination when he was on his way to find distribution for the film. This film was released before the Motion Picture Association of America rating system, so there were a lot of negative and controversial reviews over The Night of the Living Dead. One review that I do think is definitely worth checking out is Roger Ebert's review of Night of the Living Dead. He doesn't review the movie itself, but it reviews the reaction to the crowd around him as he was watching it. It's a very interesting read. This film was done on a budget of $114,000, and it made $30,087,064 in the worldwide box office. This film gave George Romero the reputation of basically being the godfather of zombies. He has some other really popular movies over zombies or ghouls or whatever you want to call them. Dawn of the Dead has a lot of fans, and so is Day of the Dead. His other zombie films include Land of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, and Survival of the Dead. Besides Romero's movies, Night of the Living Dead is the reason why we have so many zombie films today, I would say. Return of the Living Dead also stemmed from Night of the Living Dead. You could go on and on about all the zombie movies. I wouldn't have a second episode of this podcast without George A. Romero. Well, I think that wraps up my breakdown of Night of the Living Dead. I hope you enjoyed listening. Feel free to follow on social media and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for listening.